Why doesn't anyone recognize me? It started with a minor car accident that knocked me unconscious for maybe 30 seconds. When I woke up in the hospital bed, my boyfriend Armand was standing in the doorway looking confused. I called his name and he turned to the nurse asking who I was and why I knew his name. When I said it was me, he backed away and said his girlfriend was supposed to be in this room. The nurse had to convince him I was telling the truth and he kept staring at me like I was a stranger. My stomach twisted into knots I couldn't untangle. I went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror expecting to see bruises or swelling or something that would explain his reaction. I looked exactly the same as always with my brown eyes and the scar on my chin from falling off my bike as a kid. Nothing was different, but Armand wouldn't stop staring at me with this disturbed expression. My mom arrived and the nurse had to point me out to her 3 times before she'd approach. She kept touching my face saying, "What happened to you?" over and over. When I asked what she meant, she just started crying and couldn't explain. She kept saying I looked wrong but wouldn't say how. The fear in her eyes made me want to throw up. The doctor compared my face to my driver's license photo and immediately agreed something was different, even though he couldn't identify what. He ordered a CT scan thinking maybe there was some swelling or subtle injury affecting my appearance. Everything came back normal with no injuries at all beyond mild whiplash. He kept looking between me and my photo saying the bone structure was identical, but I clearly looked like a different person. He had no medical explanation for it, which I kept saying was because I looked the same, and he patted my shoulder condescendingly. I showed Armand some old selfies and took a new one to compare and said, "See, it's the same," but he pointed at my old photo and said, "That's you," then pointed at the new one and said, "That's someone else." I was looking at 2 identical pictures and my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My roommate screamed when I walked into our apartment and threatened to call the police if I didn't leave. I had to show her my driver's license and keys and recite details only I would know before she'd believe it was me. She kept saying my face was completely different, but couldn't describe how. She just said, "Everything is wrong," and started sleeping at her boyfriend's place. I felt so alone I couldn't breathe. At work, security wouldn't let me in because my bad photo didn't match my face. My boss had to come down and even she hesitated before confirming it was me. She suggested I take a few weeks off to heal from the accident, even though I had no visible injuries. My coworkers whispered whenever I walked by and avoided making eye contact. I went to an ophthalmologist thinking maybe the accident had damaged my vision in some specific way that made me see my old face in mirrors. He ran every test he could think of and said my vision was perfect. When I asked him if I looked different from my license photo, he got uncomfortable and said he wasn't qualified to answer that. Even the doctor was scared of me. My friends stopped inviting me places, and when I confronted them, they said being around me made them feel weird. My best friend said looking at me gave her the creeps because I looked like someone wearing my skin. When I asked her to explain, she just shook her head and said she couldn't put it into words, but I wasn't me anymore. I tried everything to figure out what they were seeing, including going to 3 different plastic surgeons for consultations. They all said my face was symmetrical and normal, but when I asked if I matched my photos, they got quiet. One finally said the bone structure was the same, but something else was different that he couldn't medically explain. Armand broke up with me after 2 weeks. He said he couldn't pretend I was the same person. He said kissing me felt like cheating on his real girlfriend who disappeared in that accident. When I begged him to tell me what was different about my face, he just said, "You have someone else's eyes," even though they were the same brown they'd always been. I cried until I couldn't see. I started wearing sunglasses and masks everywhere to avoid people's reactions. The grocery store clerk who'd known me for years asked if I was new to the neighborhood. My elderly neighbor who I'd helped every week called the police when I tried to bring in her mail saying a stranger was trying to break in. I was disappearing from my own life. 3 months later, I'd lost my job and most of my friends. Even my mom could barely look at me. I spent hours staring in mirrors trying to see what everyone else saw, but it was always just my regular face staring back. I felt like I was going insane, insisting I looked the same when the entire world said I didn't. Then I found a support group online for people with Capgras illusion, except they were the family members of people who'd been in accidents. They all described their loved ones looking exactly the same, but feeling fundamentally wrong to look at. One woman said her daughter's face was technically identical, but something behind it had changed. I was reading through the posts when I found one from Armand describing me. He said his girlfriend had been in a minor car accident and now wore a stranger's face even though photographs showed no difference. The comments all said the same thing had happened to someone they knew, and it always started the same way. Every single case began with a minor accident where the person was unconscious for exactly 30 seconds. My hands went cold when I realized there were hundreds of us, and we all thought we looked exactly the same. Full story on the channel below.